Good evening and welcome to Seaside Chats with the Salve Admit Guy. I'm the Salve Admit Guy, Jim Fowler, Vice President for Enrollment Management at Salve Regina University in amazing Newport, Rhode Island. We're very excited to kick off this fall's Seaside Chats with a series of discussions with faculty members and directors of our various academic programs on campus so that prospective students and families can learn more about the amazing Salve academic offerings and how we might be able to help you in your personal and academic goals. And so I'm going to stop sharing the title screen here and welcome Dr. Lou Bradizza, who is the program chair for the Department of Political Science. Welcome, Lou.
Thank you, Jim. It's great to join you. Is that lovely Newport behind you? It looks like it.
It is. This is my my virtual sitting on the back deck of Ochre Court, even though I'm actually in my home office.
I'm sitting in the clouds.
Lovely. Well, Dr. Bradizza, so happy to have you here to discuss our terrific political science program. To start off with, if you could tell folks about yourself, a little bit about your background, how you came to Salve, and what your areas of research focus are.
Sure. Well, I actually started out in IT, if you can believe it. My original degree is in computer science and applied math. I spent a total of about 12 years in the IT industry. And then I decided to switch careers because, IT is just a flash in the pan and political science is where all the money is. And so I went back to school and got my master's degree from Boston College, and then my doctorate from the University of Dallas. Then I received a postdoctoral fellowship at Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge, and while I was there, I got hired for a tenure-track position at Salve Regina as an associate professor of political science. And I arrived here in Newport in 2009. Received tenure, I think it was 2005. 2015, and I became department chair in 2017. I've been department chair ever since, and we're the Department of Political Science and International Relations. And we have a wonderful spot. I have an office that overlooks the ocean. I drive over the Pell Bridge every morning, and I have to remind myself how lucky I am to work in such a great place.
It really is the best commute in the world. I've had some rural commutes. I've had some urban commutes into Boston, which I don't recommend to anyone. And there's nothing like going over two bridges, looking out at the ocean in the morning, and just taking stock of what an amazing world that we live on.
Yeah. No, we have such a lovely campus. People will be on a mansions tour and doing a walk through the east side of Newport, and they'll walk across our campus and then sort of become dimly aware that they're on a college campus because it's so well integrated into this lovely neighborhood we're in.
So in terms of your research focus, I know that you focus primarily on politics that are American-focused, domestic politics. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Sure. My professional training is in the American government and political philosophy, and I do research in both. On the American side, I focus mainly on American political thought, and on the political philosophy side, I'm all over the place. Everything from Plato to Don Dewey and everyone in between. And so I just love the research I do, and it really helps me in my teaching as well because I can bring some of those insights into the classroom. It keeps my brain active.
So, Dr. Bradizza, can you tell us a little bit about what is particularly notable about Salve's political science program and international studies program, and really what separates it from maybe other schools that people viewing this webcast are considering?
Sure. Well, one of the, I think, strongest selling points of the department is that it's small. We have 4 full-time faculty members and a handful of adjuncts for doing the teaching. And being small, we get anywhere from about 8 to 12 majors a year. It bounces around. Some years have been quite high recently. And what that means for the student is that they're going to receive individual attention. They don't get lost in a megaversity. I've been in big universities where you'll sit in a classroom with 75 people, and that's an upper level classroom. So and it's very difficult for professors to get to know anything more than a small handful of their undergraduate students. They tend to focus their attention on their graduate students. Here at Salve, we get to know everybody. Nobody gets lost. And that means we can give students more individual attention, but it also creates, I think, a better sense of community among the students. So that's a huge selling point. We also have excellent relationships with other departments with whom we have cross-listed courses, or departments where students will have double majors, a lot of double majors. For example, we have a lot of double majors in history and political science, in ADJ, Administration of Justice and Political Science, philosophy and political science, and sometimes psychology and political science. And in fact, I like to only half jokingly tell people that these days, if you want to understand politics, psychology may be a better route. What that means is that these great relationships we formed can really help out the student, so that they can sit between 2 departments and really have the best experience. We have, for example, a whole bunch of courses cross-listed with history. And that's on account of the great relationship we have with history. So what we don't have, in other words, are departments that function as silos, where we simply don't look outside of our department. We also have relationships with the Pell Center, and we have clubs, and so the students end up getting a really they're finding their footing in their freshman year, but by the time they're in their sophomore year, they're acclimatized. In the junior and senior years, they really start to thrive.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about the double majors, the minors, the relationships with other academic departments. I've noticed in my career in academia, particularly in the last 20 years, a dramatic shift in undergraduate education away from the idea of specialization on the undergraduate level, and a shift more towards interdisciplinary education on the undergraduate level, recognizing that particularly for something like political science, where you mentioned psychology, in order to be successful in either public service, government, or in law enforcement, or if you're thinking about law school, you really have to have an understanding of many different disciplines. A laser focus on political science isn't going to be enough, would be my observation. Would you agree with that statement?
No, absolutely. In fact, I would say that even if you want a laser focus on political science, a laser focus isn't enough, because you have no history, for example. You can't understand politics without knowing something about history. You don't really understand political science unless you know something of political philosophy, and behind that, a philosophy proper. So political science wants to explain the world. It's going to have to rely on other disciplines and touch other disciplines that also try to explain the world. So no, absolutely. And we encourage our students. When a student comes to me and says, gosh, I'm thinking of adding a major or minor in history, I say, well, talk to Dr. Tim Neary. I send them right there, and I want to do philosophy. Great, I'll send you to Dr. Condell and the philosophy department. And so we encourage students to broaden their knowledge. I would say most is not only history, but most especially history. And I would say not just for political science. Frankly, I'd advise anybody who just wants an education, learn a little history.
Well, and you mentioned that point about small programs versus large programs, and I like you, attended my undergraduate at a large university, and while there were some advantages to that in terms of breadth of offering, I did find that if you wanted to get information or connect with faculty in another department that you were not a major in, oftentimes you were sort of shut out and shunned. because they had their hands full just trying to handle this big department. And so you oftentimes didn't maybe have access to opportunities that at a Salve, where all of our faculty are really a close-knit community, just like the university. And there's a willingness and also an appetite on the part of faculty to say, hey, how can we work together? How can we help students get a broader understanding of the world and their place in the world by understanding other academic areas? And there's this free exchange of students across departments
Sure.
you don't always see.
That's right. I mean, I've been to universities where the political science department will have 30, 40, or 50 professors, and your task as a professor is to get to know your fellow political science professors. That's a given at Salve. The three other professors and the handful of adjuncts, I know them. And so I've stretched out and gotten to know professors in other departments in ways that at a big university you simply wouldn't have the bandwidth for. That's right. And I do want to say one word about my own discipline, though, is there's a lot of great subjects you can study. The main reason to study political science is really for its own sake. It asks fundamentally, it asks the question, who should rule and on behalf of whom? And if you believe that the question of who's running our lives in Washington or in Providence or in your state capital is important, then the discipline is important. And so is that an important question? And I would say, very briefly, it's a big topic, but very briefly, we have 200 countries in the world, roughly. A lot of them, some are very well run, a lot of them are very, very poorly run, with very low quality of life. And the single best explanation for why those countries have such a poor quality of life is poor governance. It makes a huge difference. And that's one of the reasons people are so passionate about politics. One can be too passionate about it, of course, but some passion is perfectly justified because yes, it really is important, and it enriches the student's mind.
So to that point, what do you enjoy most about the Salve students and the engagement that you have with them in the class setting or just in the overall educational setting?
What I've noticed about our students is that they always surprise me. Sometimes they can be very quiet in their second and third year. By the time they get to their senior thesis, my colleague, Dr. Clark Mell, and I will ask them, so what sort of ideas do you have for your senior thesis? And they'll always have 2 or 3 great ideas because it's clear they've been thinking about these questions for 2 or 3 years. And so while some of them might be very quiet, as students often are, their minds are busy. Their minds are busy reflecting on what they're hearing and what they're reading and what they're writing. And they find themselves drawn to certain questions. And I find that very rewarding because it tells me that they're really getting something out of their education. They're being prompted to think about some important questions very deeply and seriously. And one of the things I really treasure as a professor is helping to bring 18-year-olds who enter Salve to a greater level of maturity as 22-year-olds when they exit, and so that they can begin that journey of being responsible citizens with, as I like to tell people, with a 20-year head start. So much of what we teach people you can teach yourself if you have the time and determination. But it's going to take you 20 years. You've got a full-time job, you've got kids, you're tired after a long day's work, you sneak in a little reading on the weekend. We can turn you into the beginning of a good citizen in 4 years. And you can save 20, and for the next 20 years, you can exercise your citizenship muscles rather than try to figure out what's going on in the news.
Yeah, I often talk about that, and I feel it's always this fall is a little strange without having sort of our traditional on-campus programs, because usually I have this opportunity to discuss to large gatherings of prospective students and families sort of the mission of Salve and the type of approach that we take to education as an institution. And in that setting, I have the opportunity typically to articulate the idea that we recognize that education is an appropriate foundation for understanding one's place and one's role in the world, how to take that and translate it into making the world a better place, and ultimately to understanding that you can't be a passive participant in society, that tweeting about something is not being activist. You have to actually go out and do something if you want to see change in the world, or if you want to see the world continue to operate in a certain way. You have to actively engage and do those sorts of things. And so I think it's great that you say it that way, because to me, that's something that really separates Salve, is that commitment that we have to helping students understand that synthesis between theory and practical application in the world.
Well, that's right. And my department is especially attached to the mission, because the mission tells us, Salve's mission statement tells us we work toward a world that is harmonious, just, and merciful. By the Department of Political Science and International Relations, look at the whole international relations side. It's centrally concerned with the question of how do you prevent war? And I can't think of a better way to make the world more just, harmonious, and merciful than to try to prevent war. And as far as the American side of it goes, we are the most powerful country on earth. That is the reality of the geopolitical situation we're in, and therefore, keeping American politics healthy or restoring it to health becomes important for the entire world. If America coughs, everybody around the world, catches a cold. So we need to stay healthy politically for our own sake, and also for the entire world.
Now, you talked a little bit about sort of the students and their thoughtfulness and their engagement with the material. I imagine that often leads to a desire to do some higher level of research. What opportunities are there for students in Salve's political science program to do research, maybe do research alongside one of you or your colleagues?
Um, in political science, it's very, very difficult for students to engage in the kind of original research you might see in chemistry or biology, cooperation that you'll see sometimes between really bright undergraduates and professors in those what are called the hard sciences. But what we do, and the reason for that is that in political science, I would say also in history, I would say also in philosophy, you need a certain breadth of knowledge before you can really generate original research. In the sciences, you can very narrowly and tightly master a particular narrow part of knowledge. If you're bright, you have to be bright. Um, and so they're very different disciplines. So, but where does that leave political science? Um, we have opportunities for research built into our program in the form of a research methods course in our junior year, and then a senior thesis in our senior year. And in both cases, we have students prepare an original piece of research. In the junior junior level research methods course, it's a small scale, but it's real research with real sources, and real thought and real writing, and a presentation to their class at the end. In their senior year, they graduate to a more demanding course, the full-blown senior thesis, and a presentation course, a one-credit presentation course in their last term where they do a public presentation. And so students have an opportunity to really do a great piece of work, and many have, that they can present, for example, to a potential employer. Or if somebody is looking for a writing sample, they can give them their senior thesis. So, and the students they always panic over their senior thesis, always do. The junior thesis, what they call the junior thesis course, and by the end of the course, they always have the same reaction. Why did I panic? Because we mentor them every step of the way. Dr. Merrill and I will mentor them, make sure that that they get to the end successfully. So yeah, so that and they really you can tell they benefit tremendously because the writing improves, organization skill improves, the research skills improve, and their presentation skills all improve. And those are all valuable work skills for the workplace after Salve. There's almost no information economy job that doesn't require, for example, great presentation skills or the ability to read judiciously and critically, to sift information, to analyze, to write.
Obviously, we live in a pretty starkly politically divided world today, where there's an ideological struggle going on between the left, the right, different philosophies of the role of government, and that has in some ways translated to a concern on the part of families about the role of the university in shaping someone's ideology. One of the things that I hear a lot from Salve students about why they chose Salve was that what they got the impression of from us was that this was not a place where they felt like their political ideology was going to be shaped by someone else, but rather they were going to get the tools necessary to shape their own ideology without feeling a sense of pressure to think one way or another. And in fact, the opportunity to be able to share their perspective, even if that perspective is not the most populist. Can you talk a little bit about how the department makes that happen?
I'd love to, and this is a severe problem in higher education. You don't see this in, for example, the food industry. I think if you go to the Coca-Cola Corporation and you ask them, what do you think of Pepsi? They'll say, oh, it's an inferior product. And Pepsi will say the same about Coke. But they're not going to accuse each other of poisoning their customers. But I will accuse other universities of poisoning the minds of their students. There are far too many professors in higher education and administrators who have abused their authority. If you go back to the 1915 Statement of Academic Freedom of the American Association of University Professors that helped establish the tenure system in this country, they made it very plain that professors were not supposed to use their classes as a platform for partisan and personal political pontificating, and yet they do. And they do this in college after college across the country, and it is a major scandal that is doing a tremendous damage to the university. Parents ought not to kid themselves. If you pick a school at random, it's like walking into a minefield without a map. You might be okay, or you might not. So how do you confront this problem? How do you deal with this problem? You have to take a step back and look at it philosophically and ask yourself, what is the fundamental problem here that is going on? One problem is the doctrine of historicism, the belief that later thought is inherently superior to past thought. That means you can ignore everybody who lived before you because they were just ignorant, because that's the way history is unfolding. People in the past ignorant, opening us up to greater wisdom. I fight that by being anti-historicist. I tell my students very directly, we're going to, in some cases, read long dead authors. We need to see them as sources of wisdom. If you're going to simply pigeonhole them as bound by their time and place, you have nothing to learn from them, and you should not study them. And the second technique that I use, there's a long methodological discussion here, but I'll abbreviate it, is to teach authors, to teach students to read and understand authors as they understood themselves. So that, for example, when you're reading Plato, you should try to understand the thought of Plato as Plato understood it. Try to recreate what was going on in his mind and follow along, rather than sitting above Plato and saying to him, "Oh, I know what you're really thinking. Oh, I'll second guess you." Again, what's the point of reading him if you have nothing to learn from him, if you're trying to instruct him on what he was really thinking? Those two problems, historicism and second guessing people by thinking you understand them better than they understand themselves, have been absolutely devastating to higher education over the last, I would say, the last 2 centuries. They've been a slowly building problem, and there are other ailments as well. But I would say those are the two worst. Now, when you teach past authors as they understood themselves, and you teach authors who contradict each other, then you help to liberate the mind of your students, because you say to the student, here is what Plato thinks justice is, and we're going to follow in his footsteps and really understand it the way he did. Now look, here's what Niccolo Machiavelli thought, completely the opposite. Let's follow him in his footsteps and see if we can understand Machiavelli's prince just as Machiavelli did. And then you have that rarest of thing on college campuses these days, a genuine intellectual conversation. And that's, now I've said some very harsh things about higher ed. I mean everything I said. And let me tell you something, I've held back a lot for the sake of politeness. Things really are even much worse than I'm indicating. They're awful. Salve is an exception to the general trend in New England. I would say that there are a handful of schools. There's about 4,000 institutions of higher ed in this country, and there's a handful of them that haven't been swamped by this ideology and this dogma. And I would say Salve, and certainly the political science department, is one of them. I think of it as a kind of refuge for students. And I've had students really appreciate that, because they will hear both sides of the argument from me. I really want to plant one image in the mind of the listener. You'll have to draw on your pop culture resources for this. If you throw your mind back a few years, there were a series of films about a secret agent named Austin Powers, the Austin Powers films. And in those films was a man named Dr. Evil. And Dr. Evil in the films developed a sidekick. And the sidekick was called Mini-Me. The sidekick looked like Dr. Evil, dressed like him, but he was about half his height. And so it was this Mini-Me sidekick was this creepy, small-scale echo of Dr. Evil. And I tell my students, I'm not interested in having you be Mini-Me to me. I would much rather that a student disagree with me intelligently than agree with me mindlessly. I don't want to create a bunch of Mini-Me Dr. Bradizzas and send them out into the world. And I would say one final point on this. One of the things that drives these pathologies in higher ed is that there's too many people in higher ed looking for easy answers to difficult questions. And I make it plain to my students, these are hard questions. Just being able to understand the question adequately is an achievement enough.
Yeah, I think that is an incredible point, because when we're talking about Salve and we talk about some of the strategic directions and the guideposts that we use to think about our compass, where we're heading as an institution, one of the things we talk about is this concept of the world needing a more thoughtful, a more informed leadership process, less diametrically opposed, strike out poles and stick to them, and more facilitative, more focused on dialogue, more bringing together people to find commonality to create harmony and improvement, and as opposed to just saying I'm right, you're wrong, boom. And I think that philosophy serves the institution well, and we certainly see it in your students. You know, another piece of that is the Pell Center for International Relations and Public Policy. We happen to be home to this really amazing think tank that looks at a variety of political issues from a really strong intellectual lens, as well as utilizes a lot of different connections in government and intellectual thought to bring in practical knowledge to students. Can you talk a little bit about the advantage of having the Pell Center on campus for a student that is pursuing political science?
Yeah, the Pell Center is a magnificent resource for political science because they have the combination of funding and connections to be able to bring really great speakers to campus. You really need both. You need somebody really first rate with first rate connections running the place, and Dr. Jim Ludis is that person, and he's really doing a great job. He has a lot of good connections in DC and elsewhere, so he's been able to bring magnificent speakers, and they have enough of a funding stream that it costs money to bring speakers, you know, and they can do that, and so it is probably the single best source of outside speakers, and it's often on political topics. And I routinely send students to Pell Center events, telling them attend it, you'll get extra credit, and hey, learn something because I've attended many of them myself, and in fact I've even hosted some events. And so no, the Pell Center is a great asset to the school.
So you talked a little earlier about the opportunity for students to participate in clubs and other opportunities for sort of self-discovery outside of the classroom. I know we have a very active Model UN group. I know we have the New Pell Scholars Program. Can you talk a little bit about what some of the opportunities are for students to expand beyond the classroom in interest in political science?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of clubs on campus students can belong to, and there's a wide range of interests. But there are a handful of them that I think appeal especially to political science students. One of them is, of course, the Political Science Club. We also have two partisan clubs: the college Republicans, the college Democrats. We'll sometimes have the same professor running both clubs. Gives an idea of how fair-minded we can be. And when students come to me and say, I want to join the college Republicans or the Democrats, I will send them there. I won't try to talk them out of that club and send them to the club, whatever I want them to join. There's none of that going on. We also have a Model UN club, which is, COVID has kind of thrown a monkey wrench into Model UN because the way the Model UN club works is we'll have a school designated somewhere in New England as a meeting place for all of the Model UN clubs in New England. Then they will meet there, and like twice a year. Dr. Clark Mill is the faculty advisor for the Model UN club, and so he's going to have some idea of what we're doing with COVID. The Model UN club is a great club, and it takes people from all sorts of disciplines who just happen to be interested in the UN, and you end up tackling real issues with students from other colleges. You get to see how international relations really works. I mean, this is a great education because one of the problems with public policy is this it tends to be this sense among people that all politicians have to do is just snap their fingers and change. It's just wicked evil that it is preventing us from progressing. It's not. No, sometimes there are just real serious problems in moving forward. It's just not easy to figure out how to get this giant log out of the way that's blocking the road. So students will, and people in DC know this. A Model UN Club is a way for students to get some real hands-on experience and maybe learn a little humility and patience, but also develop some great skills and contacts.
As we think about career opportunities for students that pursue political science, I know people think that people who do political science, they're just doing it to ultimately go into government.
Right.
But there's so many more career paths for a political science graduate, whether it's public service, whether it's federal law enforcement, FBI, CIA, law school. What are some of the career paths that you've seen our students and our graduates pursue? And if you talk a little bit in specific about preparation for law school, because I know it's a question a lot of students have who are looking at political science programs.
So I would begin by saying that there are really two reasons to go into political science. One is for its own sake. I'm not much into organized sports. And the reason is because all of the satisfaction people get from organized sports, I get from reading the news and the political news. And it's, in the case of DC, it's for real. They don't shake hands afterwards and say, great game. It's for real. It counts. So that's one reason. It's really, really important. But the second reason is that it gives you great practical skills for the workplace. Now, if you look at the American economy, over the last 50 or 70 years, it has really changed. We've gone from largely industrial to largely information. And so I tell people who want to think about what they're going to do for the rest of their lives, you need to find a job that can't be done by a computer. Because if they can get a computer to do your job, they will. So what can't a computer do? Well, a computer cannot look at a field of unstructured information, sort good from bad information, and then process it, analyze it in a way that's useful to decision makers, compose a memo or a report, and then defend that verbally at a staff meeting, answer questions. We teach you all of those skills in political science. And so we see people going in all sorts of directions. We have them getting into personnel management. We have them getting into the healthcare industry. Yes, going into the bureaucracy in government or working for the State Department or getting into a non-governmental organization. We have one person who's heading up the Portsmouth Institute in Portsmouth, Rhode Island, the Portsmouth Abbey School. We have people working on the Hill for senators and congressmen. We also have people going to law school. Political science, in fact, is the single most popular undergraduate discipline for lawyers. More lawyers have majored in political science than any other discipline, a plurality, as they say. So what special preparation do we offer? We have a bunch of law school-oriented courses that I teach. Because I'm the Americanist in the department. And so we have a course on American legal history that I teach every term. It's cross-listed with administration of justice. And there you learn the intellectual, cultural, civilizational underpinnings of the law, which is a really fascinating, important topic that teaches you actually a whole bunch of just about our civilization as well. I also teach a course in constitutional law where we look at the vexed topic of constitutional interpretation, which is extremely controversial. And I look at both sides. And then we tackle a whole bunch of Supreme Court cases on the powers of government and federalism and elections that teach people to think like lawyers, because you've got to read through these cases. I teach a course on civil liberties. In fact, I'm teaching it right now, where we go through the Bill of Rights and the 14th Amendment and some of the civil liberties in the body of the Constitution. And we go through the history of it, the intellectual and cultural underpinnings, but then dive into Supreme Court cases, landmark Supreme Court cases. So again, students who want to go into law really should know the Bill of Rights in these cases. And I teach a course on the Fourth Amendment every second spring. I'll be teaching it next spring. The Fourth Amendment governs search and seizure. And turns out to be crucially important in law, because if you're a defense attorney and you can get the evidence thrown out of court because it was improperly, the search warrant was faulty, there's no evidence, there's no case, the judge will throw the case out of court. I've seen endless courtroom dramas where this sort of thing happens, but it's for real. And finally, a course on Congress and the legislative process, where I show students how the laws are actually made. And you put all of that together along with their research methods and senior thesis course, where I'll have law school bound students do their project on a Supreme Court case, for example. That happened many times. You end up with great preparation for law school. And so we typically will send, I looked at this recently, and we'll typically send about a student a year out of the 8 to 12 majors we get a year, typically send about a student a year to law school. And we're great prep. Now, I have to tell you, in all fairness, the law schools will accept students from virtually any discipline. So why political science? Because we have that special angle with the constitutional law and the civil liberties and so forth. Also because the subject's inherently interesting.
Yeah. I always have to instruct students about that reality about law school, that it really is a multidisciplinary pathway, that I went to school with friends who are lawyers that range anywhere from political science, probably the most common because that's the most popular, to philosophy, to history, to music and theater, to biology and chemistry. All backgrounds going to law school. But the real key for law school admissions that I hear from law school admissions officers is that critical thinking and the writing.
Right.
And it seems like those are the two areas that we really hit the nail on the head on.
Well, exactly right. I mean, in terms of the critical thinking, you could hardly do better than to try to follow the legal logic in an important and controversial Supreme Court case, where I'll tell them you had 9 of the brightest lawyers in the country tackling this thing. You had 5 on one side, 4 on the other, and I'll show them the logic on one side, the logic on the other, and then I'll pause and I'll say, so which one of them was right? And and there's no easy answer because they never make obvious mistakes. And so that process of engaging those Supreme Court cases, I think, really helps to develop critical thinking because it forces the student to dive into the logic of the case very deeply, so that they can pursue that question. Well, we got it right, we got it wrong. And as far as writing goes, if you there are some disciplines that are a little light on the writing and others that are heavier. We're on the more heavy side, and so writing is one of those things where it's a talent where you really got to do it. You really got to do it. It's there are those people who can pick up a musical instrument and play it in 30 minutes, or they can learn chemistry because they're a genius. They can learn it in a week or something. Writing is not like that. Nobody's born a naturally good writer. Some people become spectacularly good writers, but they become spectacularly good writers. You really do get better at it the more of it you do, and as long as the student's patient, after 4 years in political science, they'll be a much better writer than they were at the beginning.
Dr. Bradizza, before we go, I'm wondering if you could share with us any anecdotes that you might have of recent graduates that you've worked with and some of the things that they're doing now, and maybe how their experiences at Salve got them to that point.
I just got a LinkedIn message. LinkedIn is the only social media platform I use. You mentioned Twitter earlier. LinkedIn is, as far as I can tell, it may be the only respectable social media outlet. It's like Jeopardy. Jeopardy is the one game show you don't have to be embarrassed to admit you watch. LinkedIn is like that. And I just had a message because I've been here now 11 years and it dings all of my contacts automatically on my work anniversary. A fellow who's working for the Rhode Island state government in the executive branch. We graduated about 4 years ago, and he thanked me profusely for the wonderful education he received at Salve, just out of the blue. He just had a few years to think about the education he's gotten, and he's very well along in his career. About 2 years ago, I had to do my once every 5 years massive program review, and part of that is demonstrating student success. Does our department produce student success? And I had students all the way back before when I got to Salve, all the way back to 2006. And what I noticed was the more recent graduates were at entry-level positions, mostly in the information economy. But the graduates who've been out for 5 or 7 years were in their late 20s. Some of them were peaking into their 30s, and were comfortably along in their career. And the ones back in 2006, they are now peaking into the mature years of their career. They've advanced quite a number of steps. They're working as prosecutors in the executive branch of the state government. They're working in the State Department. They're working at the Federal Emergency Management Agency, helping deal with emergency and so forth. So we have students who have talents and skills that they can take to a whole range of information economy jobs that suit their interests. And so you're not in a position where you have to do one kind of thing when you graduate. So they're all over the place. And I just see a consistent pattern of success, which is really gratifying. We do have one person who ran for office in Maine. I don't know whether he won. So every once in a while we'll get a politician, but by no means do you just go into politics.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about the success of career over lifetime. I think too often when folks are looking at college, they're looking at, well, how successful is the school at getting you a first job and an entry level, and everybody thinks that they're going to come out of college and work at Google, or they're going to go, instantly become, attorney general of wherever. But really, it is a process by which you build your career over time with the skills that you receive in the undergraduate. And I really appreciate the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce study that came out about a year ago that really lauded Salve, put us in the top 7% of all colleges and universities in the country for lifetime return on investment for a degree, for exactly that reason. There is a maturity that happens in the employment process. And I really do think that programs like our political science program do such an exceptional job of providing that strong foundation that you need to build a career over time in a fast changing economy, in one where you're never going to stay at the same place for 30, 40, 50 years the way maybe our parents or grandparents did.
No, that's exactly right. And I think part of that is the Mercy Mission. The Mercy Mission instills, I think, in virtually everybody this sense of moral seriousness. And if some students don't catch it right away, I think it sticks with them. And when you're out in the workforce, that kind of moral seriousness is important if you care about the salvation of your soul. But it also pays financial dividends, because it's the kind of moral seriousness that means you're going to be committed to your career, you're going to do a good job, and you're going to advance. And I love your point about looking ahead rather than the immediate present. I like to give the example of an automobile. When you buy an automobile, a brand new automobile, it's new for what? A few weeks, a month. And then you have a used vehicle on your hand for the next number of years until you sell it. For years after, the overwhelming majority of the time that you own a new car, it'll be used. And so when you're looking at new cars, you have to ask yourself, how is it going to behave as a used car? That should be your question. That similar logic should apply to your university education. What's it going to do for me, not straight out of school, although we do a pretty good job of placing kids straight out of school. What's it going to do for me in the long run? Because if you've got a 40-year career ahead of you until retirement, the overwhelming majority of that is going to be well after you've left college. That's what you're going to be thinking about.
Well, before we leave, I do just want to see, we do have one guest with us tonight that's joining us for the taping, a student from Colorado that is on, and I just want to give her an opportunity if she has any questions to pose them. And as I give her a chance to type something into the chat or the Q&A box, I will just tell anybody else that's viewing this either live or on tape that this has been our Seaside Chats, our fall 2020 edition, the first episode of the Seaside Chats. So Dr. Bradizza, you got to be the inaugural for this fall's programs, but we're going to be holding these programs regularly throughout the next couple months, opportunities to hear from all of the academic programs at Salve, to meet with individual faculty members, to learn a little bit more about how Salve does education and how we think we do a really terrific job of preparing students for what's next and for the future. My name is Jim Fowler. I'm the Vice President for Enrollment Management at Salve Regina University, which means I oversee the offices of admissions and financial aid. So I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't remind you that the early action and early decision application deadlines are coming up on November 1st. And so we strongly encourage you to get an early application in. The sooner you apply, the sooner we can get you a decision, including a financial award package, so you can begin to appropriately compare your options in considering your educational opportunities that are going to be available to you. If you like what you heard here and want to come back for another program, we look forward to having you. If you want to learn more about me, you can follow me at Salve Admit Guy on Twitter and sometime Instagram, though I'm still learning that platform. I'm showing my age with my lack of engagement with Instagram, but I'm starting to. But you'll certainly see a lot from me on Twitter about things that are happening on campus, things that are happening in the Newport community, as well as random musings about things, including politics and a lot of musings about soccer and performing arts as well. So you'll get a real good hodgepodge of material from me. But Dr. Bradizza, thank you so much for taking time on a Sunday
You're welcome.
evening.
Just a final point, if anyone has any questions at all, if they want to direct my way, you can try to drill down to my email page on the Salve website. You'd go to the departments in political science and in me, or Luigi.Bradizza, Bradizza at salve.edu, and you can send me an email. Final point I would make is every single college in the country has been dealing with COVID. Everyone, there's no exceptions, including Salve. The first 2 weeks here at Salve was a struggle of, it was a tangle of wires and technology and professors pulling their hair out. But as I predicted, we got up the learning curve and we settled in. So I want to say to anyone contemplating coming to Salve in the middle of COVID, don't put your life on hold because of this disease. We're bigger than that. Actually, literally bigger than the disease. We're bigger than that. And don't put your life on hold. And we are producing a really effective workaround. And we're really getting some great teaching out there. So come to Salve. See for yourself.
Excellent point to end on. Thank you again, everyone, for viewing this program, and go Seahawks. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much.